An elderly woman calls the police after seeing a black man with a white child, but regrets it upon realizing her mistake. If you want to know how this story ends, it's important to stay until the end. The afternoon was falling in a quiet suburban neighborhood, the kind of place where everyone knew each other. Neighbors greeted each other every morning. An unusual calm reigned over their lives. Until that day, when an incident shook the peace of the neighborhood. It was an ordinary afternoon when Marta, a 67-year-old grandmother with a strict yet kind attitude, was watching her grandchildren at the park. She always kept a hawk-like watch over the park, maintaining a protective gaze on every child, especially her own. Life had taught her to be cautious, and she wasn't about to let her guard down, even in such a safe neighborhood. It was then that her eyes caught a scene that, at first glance, seemed completely out of place. A tall, strong-looking black man was playing with a very pale-skinned child. At first, Marta thought they might be father and son, but something in her gut told her something wasn't right. The skin color difference, combined with some prejudices she didn't even realize she had, made her suspicious. The more she watched, the more convinced she became that she needed to intervene. Finally, unable to resist, Marta pulled out her phone and called the police, reporting what she thought was a potential kidnapping. Her heart pounded as she watched the man play with the child, trying to keep him in sight until help arrived. It was a matter of minutes, though it felt like hours to Marta, before the police arrived. The officer approached the man, whose name was Malcolm, a social worker in the city, with confusion when asked for his identification. Surprised but understanding, Malcolm tried to explain the situation. "I'm not his biological father," he explained, looking at the child tenderly. "I found him abandoned a few months ago, and since then I've taken care of him." Upon hearing this, Marta felt a lump form in her throat. She realized her perception had been completely wrong. However, what followed was even more unexpected for everyone. As the afternoon wore on, a small crowd of neighbors gathered around the scene. Malcolm, speaking calmly and with touching dignity, explained his story to the police and the curious onlookers who listened in silence. "I found him one night after a work meeting," he began, directing a compassionate look toward Marta, who was still blushing with shame and couldn't take her eyes off him. "He was in an alley, wrapped in a dirty blanket with no one around. He was crying so loudly it broke my heart. I couldn't leave him there, so I took him to the hospital." Malcolm explained how, after finding the child in the trash, he tried to track down his parents or anyone who might have left him, but found no trace of anyone. The social workers he knew also couldn't find any leads. After several months of failed investigations, Malcolm decided to care for him himself, giving him a home and slowly becoming the only father figure the child knew. "I named him Liam," he said, gently stroking the child's head, who looked at him with clear adoration. "I don't know his real name or his birth date, but since he came into my life, everything changed. He gives me a reason to keep going every day." Upon hearing these words, Marta felt a pang of guilt. She had misjudged this man, who was clearly kind-hearted and generous. While the police were apologizing and wrapping up their intervention, Marta approached Malcolm. With a broken voice, she said, "I'm so sorry for calling. I shouldn't have assumed anything. I was just worried, but clearly I was wrong." Malcolm smiled warmly. "Don't worry, ma'am. I know you were just trying to protect him." However, just as the situation seemed to be resolving, an officer who had been checking the case on his database approached Malcolm and Marta with a serious expression. "Mr. Malcolm, please come with me for a moment," he requested, gesturing for him to follow him aside. The others stayed at a distance, but Marta noticed how Malcolm's expression shifted to one of tension and, somehow, worry. After a few minutes, the officer returned to speak with Malcolm, who came back with a look of confusion and seriousness that hadn't been there before. "Ma'am, could you accompany me?" Malcolm asked. "It seems there's something else I need to clarify," he said, and Marta, still not fully understanding, followed him. The officers requested that they come with them to the station for a formal meeting, where they informed them that, following Marta's report and a background check, an alarming detail had come up. A few years earlier, a couple in the city had reported the disappearance of their newborn child, and preliminary identification tests pointed to the possibility that Liam might be that missing child. Malcolm, confused, looked at the child and then at the officers, shaking his head. But that's impossible. No one claimed him, and I checked several databases when I found him. One of the officers explained cautiously, the children's registry system had problems in the past, and due to a documentation failure, the initial investigations might not have detected the relationship. However, what worries us the most is that the couple who lost the baby had connections with an illegal adoption network. The possibility that Liam was a victim of this network darkens the situation further. Malcolm felt like the ground was slipping from under him. Could it be possible that Liam had been taken from his real parents? Or was it all just a misunderstanding? Marta, seeing his distress, felt a mixture of guilt and compassion. The situation seemed more complicated than anyone could have imagined. From that point on, DNA tests and interviews began to clarify Liam's past. Malcolm knew he had to cooperate, but each test and every interview filled him with uncertainty and overwhelming fear. Could they really take the child he loved as his own? Meanwhile, Marta, moved by the situation and eager to redeem her mistake, began researching on her own. She visited libraries and spoke to people who had known the family of the missing child. In her investigations, she discovered that Liam's biological mother had been a young woman with a history of domestic abuse, who, desperate and without support, had apparently turned to dangerous people. Marta was deeply moved by the mother's story and understood that behind this incident, there was a history of suffering and abandonment. The DNA test revealed something unexpected. The little boy was indeed the missing child. However, the results didn't conclude everything. It was discovered that, while Liam had been taken from his biological parents, he had spent so much time with Malcolm that there was now a strong bond between them. Malcolm could hardly breathe when the officer informed him of the test results. The words felt like a hammer falling on his heart. Was this really happening? I've raised him as my son. He is my son now, Malcolm said, his voice breaking. I couldn't imagine my life without him. Despite the discovery of Liam's true identity, the authorities understood that the child had formed an inseparable bond with Malcolm. This wasn't a simple case of found child, but a situation full of nuances and emotional complexity. The system would have to find a way to navigate both the rights of the biological parents and the bond the boy had with his adoptive father. Marta, watching from the sidelines, felt conflicted. She knew the truth about the boy's parents, but it didn't seem right to tear Liam away from the only father he had ever known. She was also haunted by the idea that, had she not acted out of suspicion, this child might have grown up without the love and care he needed. As the weeks passed, a legal battle unfolded. Liam's biological parents were found, but the issue was far more complicated than anyone anticipated. The couple, who had fallen into deep legal and personal troubles, were proven to have been part of an underground adoption ring. Their rights to their biological son were legally questionable, especially given their history of abuse and neglect. The court hearings were long and emotional. The biological parents tried to regain custody, but it quickly became clear that they had not provided the kind of care or stability needed for a child to thrive. In contrast, Malcolm's home was full of love, stability, and a sense of belonging. During the hearings, Liam was asked about his preferences. Though at his young age, his answers were simple. He wanted to stay with Malcolm, the man he called Dad, the only father he knew. The emotional testimonies of Malcolm, Marta, and the social workers were key to the judge's decision. Everyone agreed that, although Liam's biological family had rights, the boy's emotional and psychological well-being was at stake. It wasn't about blood ties. It was about the relationship he had built with Malcolm. The court eventually ruled in Malcolm's favor, granting him full custody of Liam. The legal battle was finally over, but it left an indelible mark on everyone involved. Malcolm, relieved yet exhausted, held Liam in his arms as they left the courtroom. "I won't ever let you go," he whispered, his voice filled with gratitude. Marta, who had been a witness throughout the process, approached Malcolm after the ruling. With tears in her eyes, she said, "I'm so glad it ended like this. He's your son in every way that matters." Malcolm gave her a nod of appreciation. "Thank you. And thank you for calling the police. I know you acted out of concern." This is not an easy journey for anyone involved. Marta smiled softly, feeling at peace with the outcome. It was my mistake, but I'm happy he's with you now. He's lucky to have you. As they left the courthouse, with Liam safely nestled in Malcolm's arms, there was a feeling of quiet triumph. This was a story of mistakes and misunderstandings, but also of redemption, love, and the unbreakable bond between a father and son. And so, a new chapter began in their lives. One where the family, built not on blood but on love and care, would face whatever came together.